Sony's GM lenses are amazing, but they're heavy and they're bulky, and for travel, that's not so good. I thought I found the perfect lightweight alternative in the Sony 24-50 2.8G lens. A year later, what do I think of it? That's the purpose of this video. Hi, my name's Julian and welcome. I bought it last year to put it on my Sony A7CR. Now when I travel with my A7CR, I generally take a few small prime lenses like this 40mm here, and then I either take the 24-70 GM or the 16-35 GM lens, really depending on what I'm going to be doing. I never take both. I mean, that really is too much weight and too much bulk, so I just decide which one to do, and really that depends on what I'm going to be doing. If I'm doing a beach trip with the family, I might take the 16-35 for landscapes or beach stuff. If I'm doing a city trip or a mini break, I might do the 24-70 instead. Or in a mini break, actually not bother with the A7CR at all. But those GM lenses always feel like a bulky investment in bag space and weight. So I came up with the plan. Buy the 16-25 2.8G and the 24-50 2.8G. They're both smaller and lighter than the GM zooms, and I can swap them out for travel with my A7CR. Well, that was the idea anyway. So after a year, am I using them as planned? Today I'm just going to focus on the 24-50, how I use it and why I'm probably not using it in the way that I expected. First, quick look at the lens. The 24-50 has a constant aperture of 2.8 across a really useful zoom range. It has a aperture ring, which is manual, or you can put on A for auto, and it's also declickable. There's a switch here if you want to declick it for smooth video changes of aperture, which I don't actually use. There's also a multi-function button here on the lens. Most Sony lenses have that these days. I don't use those either, but anyway, it's there if you do. It's weather seal. It has 11 aperture blades. There's 16 glass elements grouped in 13 groups, and it feels really well built. It doesn't at all feel like a budget lens. Well, it shouldn't do. It's well over $1,000, but it's not a GM lens. Now, some people say that it is. There will be YouTubers who will say it's basically a GM lens without a GM badge on it. I can see where they're coming from, but really it isn't. So quick comparison then with the 24-70 GM lens and what the differences are. So firstly, what's the same? Well, both of them have 11 aperture blades. Both of them are weather sealed. Now, weather sealed means weather sealed. It doesn't mean weatherproof. It doesn't mean waterproof. Basically, that's it. What's the difference? Well, the 24-50 has fewer glass elements, 16 versus 20 in the GM lenses. It uses linear autofocus motors, which are quick, but not as fast or quiet as the GM's XD motors, apparently. The GM uses fluorine-coated glass, advanced plastics, and magnesium parts. The 24-50 uses lighter plastics, which are not as impact resistant. But of course, that's part of the reason why it's so much lighter. Weight is a big difference too. Some of that will be the glass and some of that will be the size of the lens. The 24-50 weighs 440 grams. The 24-70 GM Mark II weighs 695 grams, and the GM Mark I that I have weighs quite a bit more than that. Either way, that's a really big saving. It's also smaller and more discreet than the GM lenses, and it's less value to have hanging around your neck when you're out traveling out and about as well. It also takes 67mm filters. And that would be better. It can focus really close, almost like a macro lens. I never used that either, so I can't really comment on it. It's a lot cheaper than the GM. It's about $1,099 at the moment in the US compared to $2,298 for the GM lens. That's quite a difference, like more than double. Image quality, well, it's excellent. I would say though, it's not quite as contrasty or as sharp as the GM lens, especially in the corners at 24 and 50mm. But the difference really is subtle. Now, if you then go to an aperture of f5.6 or smaller, in my mind, the difference is basically invisible in real-world shots, even when you try to do a comparison in Lightroom. You know, these days, I really think you're going to have to really search hard to find a modern lens from Sony or Canon, even Nikon, that isn't excellent. So the fact that this one's a good one shouldn't be too much of a surprise. So it's smaller, lighter, cheaper, almost indistinguishable image quality, so you think I'll be using this lens all the time, right? Well, no, I don't. Well, not on this body, at least. You see, when I started using on A7CR, it just feels unbalanced. The A7CR is such a small and light camera that putting this lens on it, I just lost that compact, lightweight feeling. Now, that's the same with the GM lenses, and obviously this is better than the GM lenses, but it still takes away from that small and light feel and handling of this camera. I have to go back to holding the camera with the lens and then having this hand free to control whatever I want to control, rather than being able to run and gun with it one-handed, which is sometimes what I like to do with A7CR. I certainly don't like it to look like a big expensive camera, and when you put a small prime on this camera, It doesn't. It looks tiny. It looks like a snapshot camera. You can get away with an awful lot of things, places otherwise you wouldn't be able to go. Put this lens on it, and unfortunately for me, it's the same effect as one of the GM lenses. It's just too big and too bulky. So I went back to using primes on A7CR instead, like this one. The 24-50 went back on the shelf. That one, I think, you might have seen it on some videos. Ultimately, it was going to be sold because it was completely obsolete to me. But then something changed. I needed to take some photos for a thumbnail one day, and my A7CR here was packed away in a bag. I think I'd just come back from some trip. And my A7R4 was sitting there on the shelf behind me, which is where it sits a lot of the time. So out of pure laziness to do this thumbnail, I put the 24-50 on the A7R4 instead. Now that combination felt great, and yes, I have just taken the A7R4 off the shelf behind me there. Much smaller than when the A7R4 is wearing a GM zoom. This is the 24-70 GM 2.8 from Sony Mark I. The Mark II is significantly smaller than this. You could probably put it about here, and it's also quite a bit lighter. Same filter diameter as I recall, but yeah, I mean, this is a beast. So I took this lens off the A7R4 and I put this lens on it. Now you could argue, why am I wasting the sensor of an A7R4 on a G lens rather than a GM lens? And I would point out to you that the sensor in this is exactly the same as the sensor in this, and is also the sensor in A7R5, the current model of this one. This is the previous generation. So it really doesn't matter. So as soon as I do this, balance is perfect. So since then, the 24-50, apart from taking it off to do this video, has pretty much lived on my A7R4 ever since. I've actually been taking this camera out on day trips and other travel. I haven't been flying with it or disappearing far away from home. It does tend to be local stuff. But this camera, A7R4, has really been sitting in the studio. This camera hasn't really left that room for a number of years until I put this lens on it, and suddenly it's given my A7R4 a whole new lease of life outside the studio. So while I'm not using on the A7CR as much as I expected, it's still lighter and smaller than the GM zooms, and the image quality is so close that in most cases you won't really notice the difference. I'm not selling it now, I'm actually going to keep it. Now, should you buy it? Well, if you already own the 24-70, probably not. But if you don't, I would say this is probably worth considering. It is less than half the price. Even if budget isn't an issue, it's much smaller and much lighter. So if you're going to travel with it, in fact, yeah, I'm going to say that. If I didn't have the GM lenses and I was just traveling with these, I don't think I'd even consider buying the GM lenses unless I knew I was going to be using them in a studio for a bunch of portrait work. Yeah, I think I'd say that. Now, one thing that is not fair perhaps in this comparison is that the 24-50 obviously isn't a 24-70 like the GM ranges. So you do lose that 50 to 70mm focal length. But you can switch either of these cameras to the APS-C mode, where you get roughly 26 megapixels instead of 61. And then at a crop ratio of 1.5, you actually get a 36 to 75 zoom on this particular lens at around 26 megapixels, which is still pretty good, by the way. That's still more than many modern cameras have today, even full frame cameras. So that's it. If you haven't got a 24-70, I think you should consider buying this lens. If you want me to do a video on the 16 to 25 2.8 G lens, put a comment down below. I'd happily do one. I have to say, the use case for me for this one, traveling, is a lot stronger than it is for the 24-50. My name's Julian. If I can run with it, bike with it, hike with it, or film with it, I'll make videos, put them here on YouTube. If that's of interest, please do consider subscribing to the channel. As always, thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.